That today we're talking about bento heads and things that you might want to think about before you create a bento head. I'm not going to actually do a tutorial today. We're just going to talk about bento heads before you actually start modeling it. So let me log out of Second Life here and go into Blender. Okay, so we have the default head here. And I've helped create quite a few, not actual popular bento heads that are out there, but some obscure heads that are, for sale out there, and my own products, of course. And some strange things that I see when people hand me a head and ask me to rig it is that things are way out of alignment. Before Bento was actually officially public and usable, I made a series of videos talking about bento heads and things that were possible, things that weren't. And I feel like quite a few of those videos kind of throw people off base because I was kind of playing around, seeing what we could do, and some of those videos put things out there that maybe we shouldn't really be doing, or is not the best practice for bento heads. So I want to talk about in today's video what is possible, what you can do, what you can't do, and kind of how things work. When we talk about bento heads, if you're a creator who's making a human bento head and you want as many of the sliders to work as possible, the bottom line is you cannot move any of these bones. You cannot move them. You can rotate them, but you cannot move them in space. Okay, so all of these features within the head that have bones are locked in place. So yes, you could make a head that's totally different from the Second Life default head, but all of the main features of the head have to be lined up if you want all the sliders to work and you want nice animations or nicer animations on your face. These bones have to be lined up in a certain way. The most important are the eye bones. All the bones related to eyes. Okay, your mesh, when you make a bento head, the eyeballs have to be perfectly lined up with the default eyes. This has to happen, or else you're going to have all kinds of problems dealing with those eyes in Second Life. They're not going to be perfectly centered. They're not going to rotate perfectly. And eyes probably could get a whole video all by themselves on how to properly rig eyes and set them up. But as far as modeling goes for a bento head, your eyes need to be exactly lined up with the default avatar. And personally, what I would tend to do if I were making a bento head, I would leave the Second Life eyes and I would get rid of everything else, and I would model from here. I would use the Second Life eyes and I would start modeling my avatar head using these bento eyes, just so I know everything is going to be perfectly aligned. Okay, so enough about eyes, but eyes are probably the most important part. So those have to be perfectly aligned. Everything else on the face can be moved slightly in different positions, but you want things to line up vertically, or else you're going to have animation problems when, certain animations aren't going to work very well on your head. And it's because things aren't perfectly lined up. As you can see here, here's the lip bones, and they're lined up perfectly with the lips. Okay, so if you're making a bento head, you want all of these bones to be lined up. Now, you could, there is quite a bit of play in this, so you could have a head that went out further than these bones. Of course, the further you move the mesh away from the bones, the more the rotations will be exaggerated on the bones. But as a golden rule, eyes should be perfectly aligned. Everything else can be aligned vertically with the default, or yes, vertically. So the mouth position should be exactly where the mouth position is on the default. The nose should be exactly. The eyes, the eyebrows can be tweaked a little bit. You have a little bit room of play, especially with the eyebrows. And if anybody has any questions, we have 18 people watching about bento heads. I figured it was going to be a somewhat popular topic, although I don't want to get too in-depth about it. I just want to talk about before you start creating your bento head and things that you need to think about. All right, so, but the further you move your mesh from these default bones, the more problems you're going to have. And probably one of the things that I notice as I'm rigging some of these heads too is people aren't thinking about the sliders. So a great example is I got a head one time with humongous cheekbones. So the creator wanted to exaggerate the cheekbones. But we already have a slider that increases the size of your cheekbones. So now they made a model which had huge cheekbones, and now I rig that head to the bento bones, and now with the slider we get humongous cheekbones. So this is what I'm talking about. When you're making your head, think about all the different sliders and don't exaggerate things that you know you already have a slider for. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make humongous lips when we have sliders to increase the size and everything with the lips. Same thing with even the width of the lips. We have a slider for that. So now you could have, I want to have, people with extremely small lips or extremely small noses, maybe like anime characters or something like that. And so you can do this purposely. But I'm just saying that when you are making a bento head, consider all of the sliders that you're going to be dealing with, and the better you consider those sliders, the better your head is going to be. So, yeah, we have 20 people watching now. And if anybody has any questions about bento heads, I think that's kind of most of what I wanted to cover with bento heads. Like I said, this was not going to be a comprehensive video about bento heads, but just before you start creating, eyes are by far the most important aspect. Maybe I'll go into, hello Destiny, that's in chat. The eyes are probably the most important part of this whole process, and I'll talk a little bit more about properly lining up your head, so or your eyes. So with any kind of eyes in 3D, some of the most important parts are lining up the pivot point. The pivot point needs to be perfect with the pivot point of the bone, or else the eye is not going to turn perfectly, okay, and move side to side or up and down. Now, with the Second Life eyes, I think, at least the default ones, the this last ring should be, I'm pretty sure, is the center of the eye. So if you select that whole ring around, we should get the center, the exact center pivot point of the eyeball. And this is kind of how I do most eyes. I do half a circle, and then I select that inner ring, get the center of the eye, and that center should match up with that bone there. Looks slightly off here, but maybe this is not perfectly aligned to center. So what you need, though, is you need that pivot point of the eyeball, and it needs to be perfectly aligned with this bone here, this pivot point right there. So that's a quick talk about bento heads. Are you going to be doing a video about rigging things on the heads? I'm more looking for piercings. Huh? Well, that's interesting. Not today. Hopefully, of course, everything I talk about is time permitting. I have tons of work to do every day, and I try and fit. This is kind of why I'm live streaming too, because I can quickly get these videos out that talk about specific topics. But I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about with before things to think about before you make your bento head. So I think that's kind of the video today, everyone. All right, so have a good one, everyone.